There is a family vault beneath the stone floors of San Lorenzo in Florence. Inside, the bodies of bankers rest in marble tombs carved by the greatest artists of their age. Their names are engraved in Latin. Their achievements are celebrated in bronze. But if you listen closely in that silence, you can almost hear the sound of coins falling through their fingers. They bought popes, they married queens, they financed wars and commissioned cathedrals. They turned money into holiness and holiness into power. For 2 centuries, the Medici family did not just influence the church, they became the church. They did not just shape kingdoms, they owned them. But every empire built on gold eventually discovers that gold cannot save you, not from rivals, not from God, and certainly not from the weight of your own corruption. This is the story of how a family of bankers from the streets of Florence rose to become the most powerful dynasty in Europe, and how, in their hunger for more, they poisoned everything they touched, including themselves. If you value history that goes deeper than dates and names, subscribe now. If you believe stories like this still matter, hit like and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? I want to know who else is searching for truth in the darkness. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Florence in the year 1397 was not Rome. It was not Paris. It was a city of merchants and wool traders, bankers and artisans, a place where gold moved faster than blood. The old feudal world was dying. A new world was being born, one where power did not come from the sword, but from the ledger. Into this world came Giovanni de' Medici. He was not a warrior, he was not a nobleman, he was a banker, and he understood something the kings and bishops of his time did not, that whoever controls the money controls the future. Giovanni opened a bank. He lent to merchants, to cardinals, to princes. He was careful. He was discreet. He did not flaunt his wealth. He dressed modestly. He attended mass. He gave to the poor. He made himself indispensable to the powerful and invisible to the envious. And when he died in 1429, he left his sons the most dangerous inheritance a man can leave: wealth without limit and ambition without direction. His son Cosimo understood the game even better than his father. Cosimo de' Medici did not just lend money to the church, he became the church's banker. He financed popes, he funded councils, he turned the wealth of Christendom into a river that flowed through Florence and through his hands. But Cosimo was wise enough to know that wealth alone makes you a target. So he built hospitals, he commissioned art, he funded libraries. He made himself loved by the people and feared by his rivals. He ruled Florence without ever holding office. He controlled the city without ever raising a sword. They called him Cosimo the Elder, Cosimo the Wise, but they should have called him what he truly was, the first of a new breed of kings, kings who wore no crowns, kings who needed none. And yet, even as Cosimo secured his family's place in history, even as he turned Florence into the jewel of Europe, there was a shadow growing beneath all that gold, a shadow that would one day consume everything the Medici had built. Because power built on gold is power built on sand, and sand shifts. Cosimo's grandson, Lorenzo, was born in 1449 into a world his family had already begun to shape. He was not just wealthy, he was educated, brilliant, charming, a poet, a philosopher, a patron of artists who would change the world. Michelangelo, Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci. These men did not just work for Lorenzo de' Medici, they owed their genius to him. Lorenzo turned Florence into the cultural heart of Europe. While other cities built walls, he built academies. While others hoarded gold, he spent it on beauty, on knowledge, on the kind of power that does not fade when the coins run out. He was called Lorenzo the Magnificent, and the name was not flattery,
it was fact. But Lorenzo understood something darker, too. He understood that culture and beauty were weapons, that art could buy loyalty in ways armies never could, that a statue could do what a sermon could not, make men forget they were being ruled.
Under Lorenzo, the Medici Bank expanded across Europe. Branches in Rome, Venice, London, Bruges. They financed kings. They funded wars. They lent to the Pope himself. And when the Pope could not pay, they forgave the debt and collected favors instead. Favors that would one day be worth more than gold. But for all his brilliance, Lorenzo made one critical mistake. He believed his own myth. He believed that beauty and wealth and charm could protect him from the envy of smaller men. In 1478, that belief nearly killed him. The Pazzi family, rivals, bankers, men who had waited in the shadows for their moment, struck during Easter Mass. In the Cathedral of Florence, in front of God and the people, they tried to murder Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano. Giuliano died on the cathedral floor, stabbed 19 times. Lorenzo survived. And his revenge was swift and absolute. The Pazzi conspirators were hunted down, hanged from the windows of the Palazzo Vecchio, their bodies left to rot in the streets as a warning. Lorenzo did not just punish them, he erased them. The name Pazzi was forbidden in Florence, their wealth was confiscated, their line was extinguished. The people loved Lorenzo for it. They saw him as their protector, their prince. But what they did not see was the cost. The Medici Bank was weakening. The loans were too large. The debtors are too powerful. The gold was running out. Lorenzo covered the losses with charisma, with art, with spectacle. He threw festivals. He commissioned masterpieces. He made Florence shine so brightly that no one noticed the cracks in the foundation. But some men see what others do not. And in those years, a Dominican friar named Girolamo Savonarola was watching, and he was taking notes. When Lorenzo the Magnificent died in 1492, Florence wept, but the tears did not last long. His son, Piero, inherited a dying bank and a city on the edge of chaos. Piero was arrogant, weak. He lacked his father's brilliance and his grandfather's caution. Within 2 years, he had lost Florence. The French invaded Italy. Piero surrendered without a fight. The people of Florence, who had once loved the Medici, turned on them. Piero fled the city in the middle of the night. The great Medici palace was ransacked. The treasures were looted. The dynasty seemed finished. And into that vacuum came Savonarola. The friar had been preaching for years about the corruption of Florence, about vanity, the greed, the Medici and their golden idols. Now, with the Medici gone, the people listened. Savonarola called for repentance, for purity, for a theocratic republic where God, not gold, ruled. He organized the bonfire of the vanities, books, paintings, jewelry, cosmetics, anything that celebrated beauty or wealth was thrown into the flames. The same city that had once worshipped art now burned it in the streets. For 4 years, Savonarola ruled Florence, and for 4 years, the people believed they were free. But Savonarola made the same mistake Lorenzo had made. He believed his own myth. He believed that righteousness could defeat power. He condemned the Pope himself, Alexander VI, a Borgia, a man more ruthless than any Medici, and the Pope did not forgive. In 1498, Savonarola was arrested, tortured, hanged, burned in the same square where he had burned the vanities. The people who had followed him watched in silence. The Medici were gone, Savonarola was dead, and Florence was left with nothing but ashes and confusion. But the Medici were not finished, not yet. In 1512, Spanish armies marched into Florence and reinstated the Medici by force. The Republic was over.
The family had returned, but they were different now, harder, colder. They no longer pretended to be servants of the people. They ruled openly, brutally. And then, in 1513, an extraordinary thing happened. Giovanni de' Medici, the second son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, became Pope Leo X. A Medici pope, the dream Cosimo had worked toward, the ultimate prize. The church itself was now theirs. Leo X was everything Savonarola had warned about. He spent money like water. He sold indulgences to pay for St. Peter's Basilica. He threw banquets that lasted for days. He appointed his relatives to positions of power. He turned the Vatican into a Medici court. And in Germany, a monk named Martin Luther nailed 95 theses to a church door. Leo X dismissed Luther as a drunken German. He did not take him seriously. Why would he? The church had survived heretics before. It would survive this one. But Luther was not just a heretic. He was a spark, and the world was dry kindling. The Reformation exploded across Europe. Nations broke from Rome. Churches burned. Wars erupted. Christendom fractured into pieces that would never fit back together. And at the center of it all was a Medici pope who had been too arrogant, too blind, too corrupt to see what was coming. Leo X died in 1521, still believing he had everything under control. He did not. Another Medici became pope, Clement VII, and he was worse. Clement was indecisive, weak. He tried to play kings against each other and ended up betraying them all. In 1527, the armies of the Holy Roman Emperor, Catholic armies, sacked Rome. They murdered priests in the streets. They desecrated churches. They stabled their horses in St. Peter's Basilica. Clement hid in Castellangelo and watched his city burn. For 7 months, Rome was hell on earth, and when it was over, the Medici Pope crawled out of his fortress and pretended nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The authority of the church was shattered, its credibility gone, and the Medici, who had spent a century buying their way to holiness, discovered that holiness cannot be bought back once it is lost. In Florence, the Medici dynasty was dying. Duke Alessandro de' Medici ruled the city with an iron fist, and his own cousin murdered him in 1337. The assassin, Lorenzino, claimed he had killed a tyrant, but it didn't matter. The Medici line continued through Cosimo I, a distant relative who took power and turned Florence into a military state.
Cosimo was efficient, ruthless. He crushed dissent. He fortified the city. He built the Uffizi, not as a museum, but as offices for his bureaucrats. He made Florence stable, but he also made it dead. The creativity, the brilliance, the beauty that had once defined the city, it was gone. The artists left. The poets fell silent. Florence became a monument to its own past. The Medici kept producing popes, but the popes no longer mattered. The world had moved on. The power had shifted north, to France, to Spain, to England. The age of Italian city-states was over. The last Medici Grand Duke, Gian Gastone, died in 1737. He spent his final years drunk, alone, surrounded by servants who stole from him. He had no heirs, no children, no future. When he died, the Medici line died with him. The grand palaces were inherited by foreign powers. The art was scattered across Europe. The tombs in San Lorenzo remained, silent witnesses to a family that had tried to buy eternity and failed. They had risen from nothing. They had controlled popes and kings. They had shaped the Renaissance itself. And in the end, they left behind beauty and corruption in equal measure. The Medici are gone, but their shadow remains. We still walk through museums filled with the art they commissioned. We still study the scholars they funded.
We still admire the buildings they built, and we tell ourselves that their patronage redeems their corruption, that the beauty justifies the means. But does it? The Medici did not fall because they lacked power. They fell because they mistook wealth for virtue. They confused patronage with righteousness. They believed that if they made the world beautiful enough, no one would notice the rot beneath. They were wrong. Every empire built on gold eventually discovers the same truth, that money can buy many things. It can buy art, it can buy loyalty, it can even buy the appearance of holiness. But it cannot buy redemption, it cannot buy meaning, and it cannot buy God. The Medici spent 2 centuries trying to prove otherwise, and history buried them for it. So subscribe if you want more stories like this, stories that go deeper than the surface, stories that ask the questions no one else will. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who still believes that truth matters more than power. And remember this, every dynasty falls, every empire crumbles, every throne turns to dust. The only question is whether we learn from it or whether we repeat it. The vault beneath San Lorenzo is still there. The marble tombs still shine, but the men inside are silent. And silence, in the end, is the only verdict history gives.